Hey guys, it's Wingfors here. You know they say that every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, God kills a Kirin? Well, this is Foreign's channel. And every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, Foreign kills a Seagull.
This is episode 10 of Watch the Overture. Usual duo, me and Yiska, but we actually do get guests nowadays. We don't just bail out. To be fair, that's actually also just because when you get in the frame of mind of getting guests, you also do just keep going until you get a guest. Like, I always do forget you can just do a show without a guest. So we could have been more regular with this one, but instead we haven't. Instead, we have been constipated. We've been backed up. We've got all sorts of topics to discuss here. We haven't been taking the fucking oatmeal or whatever people do in that sense. That's how fucked humans are, that, like, just... You have to change your own diet just so you don't just, like, fill up with shit inside and then just go, well. It's sort of a metaphor both for the psychic sort of function we're presenting the Overwatch community, Yiska, and a literal explanation of how dietary functions work. Because that's the thing. In the Overwatch off-season, most people, like, that's supposed to actually be sort of, like, just a nickname for it. There are supposed to be like the Overwatch World Cup, like teams changing rosters, but a lot of people are just like, right, shut it down for 4 months. See you next year. It's like, what is this? Are we supposed to have a sport here? You can't just shut the whole thing off for like fucking 2/3 of the year, no, a third of the year or something, right? So let's start here. Like, Yiska, this is a topic I think actually is one a lot of people would be very interested to know about, which is the Korean side of Overwatch. Like, how do these players come up? What is the situation even like in Korea? Obviously, Apex and, well, tournaments like that now, contenders, still go on within the Korean region. And I know to a lot of naive Westerners, they might go, well, does it really matter? I just follow the Overwatch League. If you haven't been paying attention, I did tell you this literally 2 or 3 times, and even the people I said it to seemed to almost go, yeah, I guess that sort of makes sense. I told people that there was only 2 ways, logically, the Overwatch League could go. Either you didn't have enough Koreans, as in you had loads of Western and, like, you know, European and North American players, in which case you have a massive problem, because what would happen would be there'd be loads of Koreans back in Korea where word would get out, or just the eye test would tell you, holy fuck, these guys are amazing, but they wouldn't be in the Overwatch League, which would be a nightmare, because good luck telling everyone, like, we've got the best teams and players in the world. Like, that would be a really embarrassing sort of, like, just like elephant in the room, as it were. Or I told people it goes the other way, and I predicted it would go the other way, and it certainly has, which is I used the term Korean creep, obviously taking like the term from power creep, etc., within different games, which is, as people realise, just by and large, it makes more sense to gamble on a Korean player, to get a good Korean player. If you're missing a certain spot that's very difficult to play, to get a Korean player who does that. As people realise that, it becomes like an arms race to get as many Koreans as you can. And you've seen, basically, there is only one team in the entire Overwatch League, the Houston Outlaws, that has not committed to the arms race of getting Koreans. And so what's ridiculous now is you're going to end up in a world where I'm very interested to see what the next few seasons are going to be like, because it is so heavily pivoted now to Koreans, and seemingly more so every day, that, like, I want to see how... Listen, here's the funny thing. This isn't what the episode's about, but I can't wait to see how these Western orgs, who already aren't making money, I was going to say big money from the Overwatch League, I want to see how those people are going to try and sell and market tons of Korean players to all of their geolocation locked franchises in North America. That's going to be like, I'm going to sit back and enjoy watching that, like fucking Palpatine at the end of the Phantom Menace when he told Anakin Skywalker, "We will follow your career with great interest." Like that's what I'm going to be like. Like, I'm only waiting to see if it goes badly and then jump in, basically. So anyway, that was a roundabout way of saying this, Wolf. We need to know the inside on the Korean scene, because either these are players we're going to see in the future, definitely the case if you think about some of the couple of teams that won contenders and were doing very well recently, or people want to know things like, what is the difference between Korea and the West? So can we start there? I know when I came into League of Legends as a new game, and it's a game I hadn't had a background in, one of the first things I tried to learn was, like, what's different in League of Legends in Korea than in StarCraft? And at the time, StarCraft 2 had just, like the year before, I think, was when all the Kesper teams had switched over. And then immediately I'd seen in StarCraft 2 what everyone who followed Brood War knew, which is give them time and these Kesper teams will just take over. Like, their teams will be the best players. They will have the most of the best players. In fact, you'll even get the other top players go and join the fucking Kesper teams. All these things happened, right? And so the same thing happened in League of Legends. When I first came over was when I think actually none of them at the beginning had any org. I think it was maybe like 3 seasons in, they switched and, like, you know, KT Rolster came in and then SK Telecom came in and, you know, Jeanette, like, they came in gradually and the same thing happened. Eventually Kesper took over the whole thing. If you ever go and look at the LCK era, like, SK Telecom have won almost every championship. KT Rolster's won one. The only one that didn't win one that was, I don't think Rox was ever part of Kesper, but aside from that, it was basically Kesper dominated. So I know we don't have Kesper in Korean Overwatch. It's still, to this day, it's not been a factor because who knows, maybe they were put off by the Overwatch League and the franchise system. No one really knows. But what I want to know is this. Actually, the setup they have in Korea, is everyone in like a proper team house facility? Is it more like the old days of StarCraft 2, you know, the ESF days where it was like you have a team house, but it's like a bit more ghetto, you don't have as much. What's like, can you give us some kind of background on what it's like for most of the top teams?
Yeah, sure. In my experience, I think the ESF comparison is a really good one. For those who didn't know, the ESF was like the very short era of team houses and pro teams that existed before Kespa switched over to StarCraft 2, before there was a lot of money for pro gamers in StarCraft 2 in Korea. And I think that you can really compare majority of teams that are in Korea to that. You have a team like Lunatic High in the past, for example, that's more Kespa regimented. Obviously, the money is nowhere near the same in terms of salaries and stuff like that. But you have, you know, coaches, you have a really regimented team house, you have practice schedules and stuff like that. The majority of teams in Korea nowadays have team houses, but it is more of a, you know, you're in the team house where you're practicing, you know, practice hours don't seem to be as rigid as they were back in the Kespa days where you had like a wake up time, a go to bed time. Streaming was not allowed, for example. And, you know, obviously, as everyone knows, most Korean Overwatch players stream, because if you're not in Overwatch League, it's kind of hard to have a substantial income as a Contenders player in any part of the world. So a lot of these players stream as kind of secondary income. But I think you make a really good point about how once Kespa took over and all those big orgs and all the big salaries are there and all the structure that comes with all that money from having a professional chef in your house and stuff like that. I think Overwatch League has the potential to be, you know, if people manage it correctly, the closest thing to Kespa we have in Overwatch,
yes,
because they have that money. But in Korea, it's actually a shame. Like, Korea is still dominating, and all the players that are being signed for season 2, for the most part, are coming from Korea. At least that's, you know, how rumors have been floating around. I think it's kind of insane and actually kind of disappointing that the Korean players we have right now, who are the best and the ones that are, you know, doing well in Overwatch season 1 for Overwatch League season 1, and the ones that will be moving into season 2, don't even have those regiments that existed in Brood War, that existed in the League of Legends, that still exist in League of Legends. Like, the scene is not even half as strong as it could be. I think Korea. I just want to put that out there. Like, it's not. I
tried telling people this, you know. Yeah, it's not as bad as it could even be. It would get.
Yeah.
If you think now, what are you on about? The LA Gladiators, Outlaws, we sort of competed. It's like, that's the fucking calm before the storm. You're supposed to be winning now if you want to have a chance.
And I mean, some of the Kespa orgs have like more money than the orgs that own Overwatch League teams, just to put that into perspective. And we're talking about big companies in Korea. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, the training regimen is one of the more powerful parts of why Korean Overwatch and Korean esports in general permeates the rest of the world sphere. But I think it's also a cultural thing as well. Like, in the West, a lot of people don't want to listen to their coach if their SR is lower than their SR, or, you know, they don't have like a proper hierarchy. And every time I talk to Western players or Western coaches or even casters who spend time going to team houses, I hear all these, you know, the rumors and discussions of there was this infighting between these two players, or this player wanted to take some time off, and so he dodged scrims, and then, you know, those kind of domino effects happen where all these problems happen in the team house. In Korea, you know, age and hierarchy is so important. Someone's older than you, you listen to what they say, even if you disagree with it, just for the good of the team. And I think that mentality is one of the reasons why not only Korean teams for Contenders Korea, but as well as full Korean rosters in Overwatch League are having so much success right now, because that's just historically been how it is. If you have a problem with someone on your roster, if you're a very Korean mentality Korean player, which most are obviously given their background, then you're probably going to just do what the coach says. And generally speaking, if you have a proper coach behind that, like, the system does work. It's proven to work. But if you let your ego get in the way, like a lot of Western players do, then the whole system that you're trying to emulate, because the Overwatch League, team houses and coach systems and chefs and everything they have over there is basically trying to emulate what Kespa has done for, decades now. So if you're trying to emulate that, but there's like a missing link in the chain because someone's having problems or someone's not listening to the coach, or the whole team doesn't believe in the coach, and you have all these coach changes and stuff like that, then you're going to have, limited success. You're not going to have that same level of success that the Korean teams have.
I would even go as far as to say, in some sense, I think with the general notion of harmony leading to success, I think that's actually counter to what happened in Overwatch League, though, because like after the fact, we heard that Nas and Bedosin really went at each other and had strong disagreements. I can tell you every single hybrid roster of Korean and Western players had these internal issues as well. We definitely heard about Fissure. I'm actually not sure how conclusive that harmony really is to success, because from the teams where I didn't hear any internal struggles, I think the only team really realistically where I didn't hear anything of that sort was Shanghai Dragons. So I'm not sure. Obviously, they had their fair share of drama, but I don't know if it's the structure per se, or if they're just more underlying, more important structures, such as, for instance, Korean coaches.
I think that, we're also in a very new scene. So these sort of things are going to get ironed out over time, especially because some of these players have not lived in houses for like this before. I don't know the exact scenario between Nas and Bedosian, but I've heard a lot of stories, right? But like if you're a Kespa Brood War pro gamer or someone who's trying to come up into the LCK scene for League of Legends, you've spent for some people in Brewery, you spent years in the team house before you even got to play a televised match. Like think about that. Yeah. Years living in a house and just being a practice partner, and then you get to play on stage. So I think you're kind of humbled in that way. And maybe if we have, similar situations occur where people are on academy teams for years and then they eventually move into the normal squad, the Owl squad, we'll have that kind of respect system, I think, kind of carry over. But I think that culturally, again, the coach, when you see the coach speaking, and everyone's in the room listening, like I think in Korea, everyone just takes that as like fact. Even if you don't agree with it, you just run with it. Then later you give that feedback, right? One of the most interesting things I saw was during that LA Valiant video series they were doing where they had the in and out thing. It was actually when Coach Moon was talking to the team, and there was a translator there, right? Like that is like the experience that you get with a Korean coach. And it was cool to see like a room full of, half Western players listening to this Korean coach through a translator and kind of the respect he demanded in the room. That's the kind of reason why so many teams are getting Korean coaches, even though they can't directly even communicate with them without having an interpreter. It's that level of experience that's so valuable.
Yeah. I mean, like just one small anecdote that's just straight baller is obviously like Lunatic High won Apex Season 2, and I would say the MVP of that season and of that final was actually Who Are You? They then joined Apex Season 3, and Who Are You, I don't know, made a stink into the team, and the coach just says, well, we're benching the MVP of the next season, and we're not only benching this guy, we're just winning the next season without you. Like in the most like ridiculous sense of proving authority. It was crazy, and that's basically what you can expect, I suppose.
That's another great example.
When you say the thing about there being a lot of disharmony in the Overwatch League, that's one thing I think that might get lost on some Westerners as well, because I've seen in League of Legends this exact experiment's been run, because North America has a lot of money in League of Legends. They've not just hired Korean players before as import players, because you can only have 2 in the NALCS, but people now, like the actual NALCS at the moment, I think has majority Korean coaches. They have a whole bunch of Korean coaches, because they then thought to themselves, right, well, these players don't always play to the level I expected, when I bought the player, was he a world champion, was he a top player? So they thought to themselves, right, well, what I need to do is I've heard all this stuff about the infrastructure and the coaching, so they get a Korean coach, and they don't realize, first of all, right, that's primarily only going to help with the Korean player, because a lot of what Wolf's talking about before wasn't like decided upon. Like Kesper didn't sit down like, right, rule 1, listen to your coach. Rule 2, live in a team house and be respectful. It's like, it wasn't like a list of 10 commandments. That is just Korean culture. It's like, that's why they've got a mad OP advantage. It's just built into their culture anyway. So the problem is, first of all, the Korean coaches are going to automatically have their own sort of like disconnect with the Western player, because they're not going to understand that guy isn't just going to automatically do everything you say, or perhaps might have his own questions about what he's going to do. Because as Wolf says here, what's clever actually about how they did it in the Korean system in other games is because they had, like in Brutal, obviously it was like over a decade, so they had a whole time to bring up like multiple generations through this system. So what's great is even the guy that to you or I, we'd only see them when they like, you know, qualified for like an OSL or in Pro League, and they're really good by that point. So to me, you or I, we see them like we would a Western player. We go, right, he's the up and coming fucking talent. He's really skilled even though he's 15. What you don't know is 2 years earlier, everyone's going to be bad when they're like 13. Well, when he was 13, he was just hoping he could get lucky and make it into a team house. And he was playing, and, you know, maybe he was winning like 40% of games against the pros, so they like let him stay as a practice partner, but he wasn't good enough to be in the team. Then when that coach brings him into the team house, it's like he has like a personal connection with that coach. Like, you know, that's the guy who gave him a shot and then put him on the A team for a game when maybe he wasn't quite ready. It's like, what's clever about all of this is you can already see how in a healthy way will get someone who otherwise would be like a rebellious figure with amazing talent who might coast on that and sort of make them feel like they're built into the system, and you'll get this really fantastic way of like raising up talents. And by the way, the other thing is, as kind of you alluded to there, Yiska, in that case, that's not like extreme toxicity, but if they notice any toxic type behavior early on, they'll just eliminate you because they know they've got so much talent.
You're so done.
You'll never get the chance to become amazing and then a really big arsehole. You'll be off already, and it's not an exaggeration. Even the low-level teams will just say, forget this guy, like, just move him out, because they understand somehow, culturally, you can't leave those, like, corrosive elements to stay within. So I think that's certainly very interesting, because if you notice, that was also another switch in Season 1. Almost every single team, on some level, got a Korean coach. So that's clearly another aspect of what's creeping over, is people want this infrastructure angle, even though it might be a bit trickier, it feels like, to implement it in a team, especially one without all Korean players. And I will say the last detail is, the reason why I know that stuff's baked into Korean culture is because there was a lot of stories in the early days of bringing over Korean players in League of Legends where they would bring in a Korean and be like, right, so you're probably just going to want to sit there for 15 hours a day practicing all day. And the Korean would basically, I mean, they wouldn't just admit this right up, but the gist was like, what are you on about? I'm not in Korea anymore, idiot. Like, that's why I joined this NLCS team. Like, it's party time, baby. Like, I'm going to do my 5 hours like everyone else, and then I'm off. You know, like, let's go to fucking K-Town. Let's just chill out. Let's have some fun now, boys. We've got all the money, right? Like that, you know, that's also the expectation within Korean culture. When they get out of it, I could believe there's fucking mad fights in the Overwatch League and players we heard about this with Effect in Dallas Field, players seemingly becoming a bit of a diva, even being like, well, I'm fucking sick. Why are you guys losing the game? You know, like that could happen. So it's definitely interesting to see like the culture clash in that sense.
Yeah. And you have some players like Rascal who are kind of the opposite, where they're like, well, I don't know, I'm just training a lot and no one else is like training to my level. So like, what's going on? You know, so you can have like both sides of like the lone Korean and a more Western roster. Happen in StarCraft all the time. The people moving over to, NA with teams like EG and stuff. And then the Korean players being like, well, these guys just like go to the movies. I thought we were practicing, like what's going on? Like, but yeah, you know, going back to your point on the kind of the filtering out the toxicity, most of these, if you look at these postings, because most people will like translate these, you got people like Anas Talsmas posting these tryouts things that are happening, which are always alluding to, oh, this team is basically disbanding or sending all their players to OWL. One of the things that's usually listed is like, what's your battle tag? What are your main heroes? What's your average SR? And it'll be like for the last 3 seasons, by the way, not just this one. Like, what is your SR for like the last 3 seasons? And then it'll be like, you must be available to stay in the team house for a few days. Usually, like, that's one of the requirements. So after they try you out online, they will then have you come to the house and make sure that you get along with everybody. They want to make sure you're not super shy dude who's never going to talk, never communicate, which in Overwatch is a super important, valuable thing, is to be able to share, you know, ult charge and stuff like that. Make sure you're not going to fight with people. Make sure you don't have an ego. Like, can you get along? And that's not, again, to the level of the Brood War stuff where you're in there for years, potentially. But I think that is one of the things that is missing in Overwatch League, because people do a lot of trials and tryouts, but like no one's really sending these Korean players temporarily like across the ocean on a plane and having them live in the team house for a week and seeing like, is this going to work? I think everyone's just kind of purchasing talent, and that can only get you so far. I mean, super teams, fail a lot of the time across all these sports for that reason. You just get the best players and put them in a room. Doesn't mean they're going to like each other, and sometimes it means you've got some of the biggest egos as well together with no one to kind of push back on that, and it creates a lot of problems. So I think that having that filter of having someone come to the house and meet them, have them spend time with the team, scrim with the team physically there, I think that's very valuable.
Sure. Because the other aspect as well on the coaching tip is obviously as they hire all these Korean coaches over to Western teams, I can already tell you, like, this is going to happen sooner or later. What will happen is there'll be some coach who his team will win contenders. They'll get like the top placing, and some Western team will be like, right, he's the top current coach in Korea. Let's get him in, and he's going to come over. And especially depending on the team setup, potentially fail, partly because his expectation will be that people will behave in a certain way. Also, then there's the secondary factor, which I feel like is still very lost on Westerners, which is the Korean coach setup. Actually, funnily enough, is advanced for the West, because in the West, we often just had one coach in League of Legends, and he basically did everything a coach could do. He tried to coach the egos, he tried to set up the practices, he tried to arrange between the org and the players, he tried to do the analysis, he tried to be like the expert on the game and decide how we're going to play. He then tried to develop the players. Like, you're trying to do basically what in a sports team would be like 5 different roles in one human. And what that often means is you just don't do the ones you don't know about. Like, if you're someone who's a wizard, like all the analytics, but you're not like a natural leader, you're probably just going to be a bad coach as like an ego manager, or in terms of developing a young player and telling him how to play. But you might tell him everything great in the game. That's one thing I'm actually concerned about in itself, is like when they hire team coaches to the Western squads, do they know, are they getting the head coach, which is the guy that's going to do all that brilliant stuff with like young players and balancing the team out and setting the practices up? Are they hiring the analyst, basically, who's usually called the strategic coach in Korea? He's the guy who might know everything about the game and might be a genius about that, but without the infrastructure where he's used to having the other guy sort of enforce it all, will he even be able to get that through? Believe it or not, I think there's actually some people might be listening to this video now like, shit, there's a distinction between those two. Wait, who did we get? Like, I couldn't believe that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, imagine there being a difference between the person who sets the schedule blocks and the person who sits down with players during those. If you're the greatest analytical mind and you're even great at speaking about it, if you have a bad organizational mind, you can't get the team together for a practice session. You can't make sure everyone's there for scrims. You can't have people follow you, and then you have to be an analyst that people believe in, not just a big face. And I think a lot of teams don't vet their coaches or don't vet their players at a deeper level, because it's in Overwatch League right now during his trade windows, it's a grab bag of, we got to get everybody we can really quick, or else someone else is going to get them and hopefully get them for the right deal. And because it's so, every single time there's a signing window, and even during the regular season, everyone's just running around trying to get these best players. There's less time to vet, and so people aren't doing that. But I also think that when you look at the kind of these coaches coming in, the coaches also don't necessarily have an idea about what they're getting themselves into either, and what the team setup is like, and what the schedules everyone's playing is. Because if you say you come in as an incredible Korean coach, like say Young One from Runaway, right? He comes into a squad, say non-Runaway squad, like Envious or something like that, and he expects that Envious is running a similar practice schedule to what Runaway is in terms of scrims, because some of the Envious players stream, so some of the Runaway players. You come in thinking, okay, this will be easy. I'll just kind of port my knowledge through an interpreter into these players. But maybe he gets there, and again, I'm just making this as an example. I don't know what Envious's scrims are like. He gets there, and then the Envious players start streaming too much, and he can't get them together to do the amount of scrims he likes, or he can't do like VOD review stuff with them. Maybe Envious doesn't do VOD review at all, and he has to teach them that that's an important part of his coaching style. You can't just bring a coach because he won a tournament. That's not how this works, and I think a lot of people think that it is.
Yeah, I think the evaluation process of coaches in general is like we don't have any data to go on. For instance, if you look at Wizard Young's record, if you think about, okay, he was at Gale Force for a while, that team didn't do quite well. Then I think then LW Blue, they always seem to sort of underperform under the perceived level. And then
if anything, you would have guessed that he was a bad coach, because if you looked at LW Blue, you'd think this is just talent with no coaching. That's what it looked like, But apparently the guy was the best coach.
And now we don't even know who did what. If it was Pavane or Wizard Young doing it. I think it's quite hard to evaluate. And I think the job of a GM is actually massively influential for a franchise to pick. It might arguably be the most influential role you can pick, because if that person is good at evaluating specific skills and then putting that team together, of course, the head coach can help with that, but also have people skills and understand who meshes and whatnot, or who's then also willing to give up some authority on certain structures where the GM himself is not as good. I think it's massively influential.
I like the way you said that, though, because it's true, especially because that's another thing the Korean teams will do. It's like in Overwatch, I saw some of them had 4 people listed as coach, and it's who really does what? Who's that? What? What I really want to know here is who's the guy who made the genius setup, or who's the one who came up with the approach to the team, But you can't really know that. That's if you were oh, sorry, I've bought a new musician from this band. Oh, fuck, what band is it? The Beatles. Fucking hell, the Beatles. Yeah, I've got the drummer. Oh, you idiot, that's the he's the bad one. What are you doing? Oh, I've got that bassist from U2. Who is he? No one knows that. We only know fucking Bono and the other guy, The Edge.
You got the drummer. You got the drummer. You wanted him to play bass, and you didn't check.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute. You don't like playing bass with that guy? Shit. Oh, yeah. Well, I've signed you up for 2 years. What about this then? So, Wolf, one of the questions people have, it's a naive question, but we'll put it to you anyway. So, since coaches are getting taken, since all these players are getting taken, so it looks like at the moment that anyone who watched Contenders, almost the top 3 to 4 teams, are just going to be neatly swept up into a fucking doggy bag and taken over the Overwatch League somehow, and we're going to start again. We're going to raise the talent up again. Now, the naive question I have to ask you, Wolf, is, can Korea replace this talent?
I think there's 2 main reasons why they can. The first one is the pretty obvious. One is age. Obviously, you have to be 18 to play in Overwatch League, and a lot of the players that are really up and coming and talented will then have multiple years, because we're still in the first year, right? Yes. We'll have multiple years to become better at the game, and then also become old enough to be the Overwatch League. I think the players we have now, they're 15, 16. Next year and the year afterwards, are going to be oh yeah, I remember this player, but he was okay, but now he's a god, and we have to have him. If you look at the history of esports as well, in early parts of games, at the very beginning, players look like gods. And then when you look at that 5 years later, you're oh God, everyone was terrible, compared to where we are now. So the youngest players always have an advantage in that way. So I think that's the first main reason. The second main reason which is somewhat tied into that, is that in Korea right now, if you want to be an FPS gamer, you only really have 2 choices. You have PUBG, which is not doing very well, I think, in terms of what the esport is kind of tiered to be, compared to Overwatch. Because in Overwatch, you're did you hear about the Runaway salaries? Because every rumor that gets posted on Reddit is translated on Inven. People are saying PUBG is a little bit shaky right now, and I don't know what PUBG Corp is doing for esports, but it doesn't seem like a very stable path to where I want to go. Overwatch seems like the way to go. So those are kind of your 2 options in Korea. If you want to be a League of Legends pro gamer, too late probably, you're too old, or you're too late. And then StarCraft 2, is not really a viable career path, and then you're really just kind of you're grasping at straws as to what are viable esports in Korea. So I think a lot of these people are playing and motivated to play because of the money, but a lot of the younger players are looking at this long term, and I think a lot of teams should be looking at this long term and should be picking up weaker players and trying to hold contracts with them. Because even if you get a 15-year-old player now and he's weaker, for example, say he's a player on WGS level in Korea, at the very bottom of things, in 3 years, when he's eligible for Overwatch League, he should theoretically be one of the best, as long as he continues to play and practice at a high level. If you look at StarCraft 2's history, for example, some of the players that got the biggest salaries at the beginning were the TSL players. Fruit Dealer, it was the first GSL champion, and he was called an innovator of his time. He was winning the Zerg versus Terran matchup on imbalanced matchups, basically against Terran when it was favored for Terran on those maps. And he innovated the way the Zerg was played. You could draw that connection to Miro, for example, who then went to one of the best funded teams, Seoul Dynasty, picked up a bunch of coaches. Miro was the innovator of Winston, etc. And then 2 seasons later, Fruit Dealer was out of the GSL, still had his big salary, etc., but was just totally irrelevant, totally gone. He was an older player, right?
Yes.
Miro's not old, but he was at the beginning of Overwatch. Very innovative Winston, very, very good. But in my opinion, played very horribly and never adapted, never continued to grow in OWL, and he was not even re-signed for Seoul Dynasty. So the talent we're looking at now looks incredible, but the talent that continues to play in Korea, even if they don't get as famous, or even if they don't get as popular as as long as they continue to play and stay on these teams, will develop and grow while they have like no egos. You know what I mean? While they're like in this incubator of, I will get there eventually if I keep trying hard. And it doesn't even have to be 15-year-olds. It can be 17-year-olds who have a whole extra year before they're allowed to be picked up, you know? Like, I think Huxall is a great example of this. Like, Huxall could have maybe been part of the Overwatch League. I don't think he was old enough last year, at least at the beginning of the season. And now he's got a whole extra year of experience before going into that level. So I think that when you know there's this much money in the scene, you're an FPS gamer, you want to keep playing, you have something to work for. As long as the tournament keeps running and the teams keep supporting you, and you can do that without feeling like, oh God, like I should definitely go to school because this isn't working out. But I think there is an argument to be made for that.
I think the problem with the Huxall example is that I honestly felt his prime almost, and that's obviously like presuming the future, but he seems to be going downhill ever since.
Oh, I agree. I don't mean to use Huxall as a perfect example. I just meant like just thinking of someone who needed an extra year. I would agree with that.
It's actually quite scary how many people perceived peaked under the age of 18. The other guy that obviously comes to mind is Flower or Nanohana now, right? So that's a little bit of an issue I have with the Overwatch League age restriction. Obviously, you can't do anything about the legal situation, but I think we're missing out on a lot of peaks. You could even argue Sparkle, for instance. Of course, we don't know how his career will continue, but it feels like I don't know if these people can actually move into these veteran positions, but because most of the time that actually means going to a less mechanically demanding role, or like basically onto main support, something like that, right? So sure, that I think logically that follows. I just don't know if we have empirical evidence yet for these young players actually making the move into these situations.
I think it's just we only have the data to see that kind of progression in other esports, but in Overwatch League, we don't have. I mean, as we've kind of alluding to, it's a very new game, so we don't have that data yet. Like, it may be that Overwatch League's peaks for age is much lower, or it may just be that the way the motivation works for Overwatch outside of Overwatch League, because everything else is so tiny comparatively, is hard. So if you look at like an LCK player who's played early back in the early days, back when it was called Champions, and then they play today, like Score, who just won his first title. He played when he was very young. He had a lot of experience, but throughout that time, he was making a great salary. And he's on a famous team. He's got tons of fans. It's the biggest esport in Korea. So when you're playing in Contenders Korea, even though compared to the other regions, it's the only offline one, it does feel small scale compared to Overwatch League. So it can be a little bit tougher to stay motivated if you're someone like Huxall, for example. I don't know. I guess Flower, is really one of those players that really, disappointed everyone when he went to the academy squad because he just could not keep up. Who are you, on the other hand? You didn't have the most mechanically sound roster with him, but he performed very well. So every player is different for sure.
What about this then? So one of the interesting details, I know some Western fans will have heard this, we've mentioned it on Oversight a few times, but one of the most bizarre parts about Season 1 of the Overwatch League is that actually not everyone turned out to be for sale, because the big example was the Runaway squad, who were one of the best teams and had placed top 2 a number of times, chose not to go over to the Overwatch League because, if you notice how it was done in Season 1, except for Cloud9 picking up those 2 entire squads, generally there were people being picked as players. Like, they wanted to do it like a la carte, like, right, I'll have this player and then this guy, you know what, I'll put these 2 players who've never played together next to each other because I think they'd work, and these players basically said, like, we won't do it. Like, if we go over, we want to go over as an entire team. Like, either you buy the whole squad, in which case, cool, we'll be like your Lunatic High type scenario, or we're just going to stay in Korea. And seemingly at the time, people thought that was a big gamble. struggle, because obviously, maybe you don't get that, like that's a very big ultimatum to deliver. Maybe your team doesn't do as well, but obviously they have still been a good team back in Korea. If anything, I think actually it looks like the gambit has worked out, because apparently based on all these rumors, they're probably going to get paid even more when they go to an expansion team now, because you can just buy wholesale a team that the perception is they could just be one of the best immediately. But here's the question, Wolf, is we definitely did see some sort of a transition period for almost every team. I mean, almost every single team that went over, like either wasn't as good as they were in Apex, or maybe some of the players had issues, or maybe it took them time to adapt to the different format and living in LA, whatever it was, there was factors that seemingly meant it wasn't as simple as, before the season, everyone thought it was like, right, well, these are the 3 Korean teams, they'll be 1, 2, and 3, and then, maybe Fuel and Outlaws can be 3, 4 and 5, like that's the way people's mind really went, which it wasn't quite that way, even if at the end it was top Koreans. So what is your thoughts as potentially Runaway just comes in as an entire squad to the Overwatch League? Like, will they see these same problems? What do you think?
I think that Runaway is a little bit different because they've, for the most part, most of the roster has been together for a while. I mean, the core DPS, obviously, is Stitch and Hoxall since the very beginning. And every transition for roster they had was very slow. There was never a moment where Runaway was like Kongdu Panthera that became Spitfire, and then boom, yes, new Kongdu Panthera. There was never like, the org has had like a slow trickling of its players to form the roster that we know today. So there was never just a big like remove everything and start over. So the name means more than just like an org name, and it's not even really an org. It's, Runner and his wife Flowerbin that are running the whole thing. I think that because they've played together for so long and they have such experience with each other, I think that their biggest challenges they will face will be the format, because they've never played that much in one go before. They've always played the tournament format, which is the way Korean leagues have been played for almost forever outside of Pro League and then the LCK format change. So that's going to be a lot of schedule for those guys while they're adapting to living in the United States, and then later on, potentially traveling to multiple locations. But I think that Runaway will do well as long as they can continue to keep up with the meta, because I think that's always been a big problem for Runaway meta-wise. But if you're making just the argument of a lot of the Korean teams came over and had, non-game issues, like outside of the game-related issues, I think because they've been together so long, I think it'll be easier for them to get through it. If they come as a roster without Flowerbin, without Runner, who obviously is still in the military at the moment, so can't technically go, but if it's not him and it's not Flowerbin, and their coach currently Youngwon, if those 3 people, one of those 3 people, if they don't have any of those 3 with them, and they go into a completely new environment, say China, and they have a Chinese manager, and it's broken English talking to them, there's not a lot of Korean in there, then I can foresee a lot of problems, potentially with this squad. If it's like that jarring of a transition with none of their original staff, then yeah, it could be a disappointing round 1, let's say, or stage 1. But I think overall, as long as they are communicating well with each other and it's the same squad and they don't get split, I think they will do very well. Will they be necessarily going to win the whole tournament or anything like that? It's way too early to say, but I think they will definitely see some playoffs and they will not disappoint. I think in the same way that Seoul Dynasty was, in my opinion, the most disappointing team of the entire season 1.
I think in sort of, okay, this might be super hindsight analysis, right? But if you actually looked at Lunatic High in season 4, I think there were like Nero was way past his prime. This guy was a liability since end of season 3, I would even say. Then, like, basically, the reason why most reasonable analysts had them pretty high up is because everyone thought, oh, Flathead is going to be the all-fixing issue. They never had a strong DPS. Now that strong DPS comes in. Turns out one meta switch, I think, maybe, we will see if we actually get to see more Lucio and Ana, and Toby and Jaehong can actually stay on that. Will be quite interesting to see if they can come back. Maybe there was just a drop in form in general, though, for these guys. So that certainly also remains to be an issue. So I actually don't know if the expectations we had for them was fair, so to speak. But I think I actually see quite similar issues in the Runaway roster. I think that DPS lineup is actually not Overwatch League playoff material. I think Stitch did a valiant effort on Widow, for instance. They are sort of, I don't know. I feel like there's so much nostalgia when people talk about, especially the DPS line. I think that's quite serviceable. I also don't think you can expect them to underperform. I'm not sure if they can get you a deep playoff run. Basically, I would, if I was that GM that picks up that team, I would definitely take a gamble on, I don't know, some up and coming DPS player that probably like signs with you for like 60K or 70K. Possibly even without a buyout.
Yeah.
Just someone that you can develop into something. Because if you're already supposedly paying this much, I think that's a minor investment that you should definitely take. Because I think the threat of this happening, like basically Envious and Lunatic High happening to you, is too big to take.
Yeah, I think that meta is, we're moving a bit away from the topic runway, but I think meta is such an underrated topic for analysis in Overwatch League, because if you look at NYXL and people who asked me, I've talked to a lot of people out here, a lot of casters out here. We discuss the Overwatch League a lot. People asked me if I thought NYXL was going to win the whole thing, but after stage 4, like week 1, I was like, there's no way. Like Sabielby can't play Widow, Pine can't play most maps, so like he can't really fill those shoes, and he's not flexible enough. And it was, for me at that moment, I was like, well, there's just no way. Like they just can't win. They can't do it because of the timing of the patch, right? And that's unfortunate, but because the tournament's so long, like you will see multiple metas throughout an entire season, which, is good and bad. Otherwise it gets stale, but, a team that might be the best for the majority of the year just gets totally crushed because they can't adapt to a new meta. And I think that Runaway was a team that used to be really good at dive, used to be so good at understanding how to dive properly. Same with Lunatic High, with Huxel on Genji, Stitch on the Tracer. And now I feel like their dive is actually quite weak, but their ability to play, triple tank, triple support is quite strong, and they have some flexibility there. Like Stitch is a great McCree. When you're playing against Winston's, for example, Huxel can play Pharah, so that's countering to supports and stuff like that. But yeah, I think meta always has to be taken into account when you look at a team that excels in a tournament, especially when we're, again, this new in Overwatch, where no team has been around for 3 years, so you could really break down year by year the graph, like the chart for where they started and where they ended up. It is important to remember how Runaway won this finals, and also how close they were to losing it. I think Runaway's value is actually not inherently in how good the players are, but how likable they are and how marketable they are. And I think that people should look at Runaway as a team that should be good, but also is just a great team to cheer for. Everyone's going to want to root for this team. That's why their value is so high, not just because they're a group of elite Koreans that cannot be touched.
I think the same fear is, though, with KDP, just the same. I think that patch also fell into their lap. Like, I don't think... I personally, if I was to be a GM and I can't get Runaway, I'm picking Element Mystic any day over KDP, because they seem to be much more adaptable to, or they were better in most metas. And then obviously, yes, there seems to be almost like a psychological issue with them, where they underperform in high pressure situations, or at least have these series when it is knockout stages and they can't bring it there. But I don't know, like KDP for me is a team that you need to pick for your parts, for instance. And their decay obviously stands out. Certainly their backline. I don't know. I'm quite surprised to see which people from backlines in general. So, for instance, what about Violet? What about
Violet, incredible player. Absolutely.
J Lee.
Yeah, J Lee also. There was rumors about Jexay. I don't remember which team he was being talked about, but I know that people were discussing him a lot. It might have been one of the Chinese teams. I know Fuse as well has been rumored to be joining one of the Chinese teams. Fuse, super underrated Lucio player from MVP Space, and picking up the parts can work. I think if you insert them into a Korean team. So, well, as we've already seen, if you put them into a team like Shanghai Dragons, doesn't matter how good you are if you can't communicate what's going on. Like, if your supports in the backline of Shanghai Dragons in this case are unable to talk to the DPS who are shouting at them, then how is that ever going to work? Like, I cannot believe people thought that would work. I was not shocked in the slightest to see that team got worse after they picked up more Korean members after the beginning.
Well, it's like the sad thing about that team is I think history will actually make that team look even worse than it even was. And that might sound like a ridiculous statement for a team that lost every game. But like, for example, with all these rumors that like Ado is going to go to one of the better teams, a Korean team, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I bet that guy just pops off on one of those teams and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, he's a really good player. It's like, yeah, he was the whole time, you idiot. He was playing in a team where he couldn't even communicate with the fucking other players in the team. And they were just probably seemingly had the worst coaching setup in the entire universe. So, like, what did he expect?
Yeah, there's a lot of that happens, and people just forget. And then people call it the Fleta effect, which I don't like that term, because I think that Fleta was the best player on the worst team in Apex, Flashlux. I almost called it Flash Wolves, Flashlux. And there were moments where like literally he AFK'd in game, and I had to commentate like him just standing there. I didn't even know what to say. Like, he's clearly having communication issues with his team. Maybe he's got an ego. I don't know. But I look at Fleta as like an incredible player that could have potential. But when he played that show match, the Soul Cup, where he was announced as part of Lunatic High to then go into Overwatch League, that one time, everyone decided he was the greatest player in the world in that one moment.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't understand how that happens. Like, I mean, I was hyping him up a lot when I was commentating him, because that's what you do as a commentator. It's very exciting. But when you look closer, like, he and Munchkin were so overhyped for what they actually were and where they came from. Like, Munchkin was a player who was famous for putting pulse bombs into a graviton surge. That was like his accomplishments. And if you look up Munchkin on like if you search Munchkin on Google Images and like filter it to GIFs, all you will see is him like throwing pulse bombs into Bernard and other Zarya players' grab surges. Well, I mean, he was a good player. He obviously works well with the team, and that's why they picked him up. But the community's reaction, I feel like, is often very much spiking in the incorrect direction.
It's obviously going to be like skewed by the results, isn't it? Like, obviously, the second you win, this is one of the reasons why people like Lunatic High potentially got overvalued, is once you've won, people in their mind, they've already decided you're the best. And if you've noticed, there's often like an ad reaction where even when the best player, Jong's an obvious example, falls off, you don't want to believe it. You want it to be like, it's just a dip, he'll get it back next season. Because like, the best example for me was, like, I used to watch only the big matches of Apex. So obviously, if you only watch like a lot of the playoff matches, Kongdu Panthera was a team that famously just underwhelmed. Like, every time you thought that it was their time to go all the way, they oftentimes just like lost the series like one before they should have. But you go back now and look at that lineup, it's like, holy fuck, look at these players. Like, this is outrageous, this lineup. Like, that should have been a lineup where, forget the team and where they've placed. Like, I'm signing half of these players like the first chance I get if I'm the Overwatch League, and we redo it all over now. Like, they had some amazing talent, but if you're only going by results, you're going to naively think, nah, they're not that good. It's like, the pieces are there. I know they haven't figured it out somehow, but the pieces were there the whole time. Right, here's a question for you, Wolf. Is people, I know, to me, this doesn't have that much connection to the esport, because I know, like, for example, when Overwatch first came out, people tried to use it as a bizarre talking point to gauge whether League of Legends was dying, because they kept using that metric of, like, which is number one in the PC bangs, like, is it League of Legends, is it Overwatch, and then whichever one was doing better or worse, they tried to imply, like, oh, the whole scene's switching to that one, and it's like, if you look, they've both been pretty consistent. Like, eventually, Overwatch obviously had the casual spike at the beginning and then fell down, and then, like, League of Legends and other games, certain numbers of PUBG went to the top again, right? What I know anyway, there are going to be talented Koreans and there's going to be people going pro no matter how big the game is. But what has that aspect been like? Like, is it still one of the bigger games in the PC bangs? Is like the Korean scene heavily into Overwatch still?
I think so, yes. I mean, I just opened up on my phone because there's an app. If anyone's ever curious, because people ask me about this all the time, it's called Game Tricks or GA Metrics, whatever you want to pronounce it as. And you can go to the website, you can put it on your phone. I've got it like open right here. Overwatch is currently number 4 in PC bangs as of yesterday. It's always one day behind. So today's numbers will be uploaded tomorrow, and it shuts down in the evening for Korea. So if you check during the middle of the night in Korea, it's not going to list until the next day. But Overwatch is 8.86% of PC bang shares. 4th place behind FIFA Online 4, which FIFA spikes up ridiculously high when they do events. So it's normally actually down at like 5th or 6th. PUBG is 2nd place at 21.17, and then League of Legends is sitting at 1st with 29%. Just below Overwatch, 5% lower is MapleStory. For further, I guess, detail, like StarCraft 1 Brood War is 3%, 7th place. Just for games that you guys know. I actually am so tired of people in the West and in Korea, but also mostly in the West, talking about PC Bang rankings as a gauge as to how well the esport is doing. Because if you compare viewership for Overwatch contenders in Korea, which does change radically based on who's playing, sometimes upwards of like 40K, viewership for Overwatch on Twitch, and it's also broadcast on TV. I don't have those numbers, but viewership for Overwatch has been consistently higher than like pretty much any PUBG tournament overall, right? Some lows in recent times I think have been lower, but just consistently across the board, it's been higher than PUBG. League of Legends is still the big dog in Korea. Like, I don't know if that's ever going to change. I think if Riot with their new LCK next year like hits the ball out of the park, then that esport could be here forever. Who knows? But I think Overwatch is still a game that everyone respects. Like when people ask me what I do in Korea, I used to say StarCraft 2 is my game, and then every Korean would be like, "Oh yeah, I never tried that one. I only played Brood War." Now when I tell people I cast Overwatch, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I love Overwatch. Like I play Lucio or whatever." Like everyone's played the game, everyone's tried it. But it's a popular game. But the PC Bang number doesn't mean it's necessarily like it's been sitting at number 3 for a long time. Doesn't mean it's the third most popular game in Korea or it's the third most popular esport, that League of Legends are just better than it. Just means that on that day, that many people were playing it in a PC Bang, which is massively less relevant now than it was 10 years ago because PCs are affordable. Everyone's got one in their house. Sure. My neighbor is just out the window. I could see into his, he leaves his window open and, he smokes in his room and he plays League of Legends all night, every night. I could see it. He's playing League of Legends in his house. Like, people play games in their house now. That's how it works. PC Bangs are a social thing. It's fun to do when you have like an hour or two between whatever you're doing, like a coffee shop. It's fun. But it's not like if the number in the PC Bang says this, then it's like, but PUBG is 3 times as high.
I think that's also, by the way, why FIFA is always so high. Because I always noticed whenever I went into the PC Bang near my house, like FIFA's the game that you go in if you're just on your own and it's like you haven't got anyone with you and you can just play as like a because you can just get matchmake super easily and it's just football. Everyone knows, like it's got such a low learning curve. It's like I feel like that's just the random game someone does when they've got an hour spare or something, But it's obviously not a massive esport, is my point, even though it's high up on those rankings.
I think that like people forget that. Those are just people in a computer room playing a game rather than like the overall active players and how many esports players they have and what the salary is and what the future plan is and stuff. I think the PC Bang number being low is like kind of something that the West likes to use to kind of be very doom and gloom. I know that, for example, in my opinion, there's an incredible amount of PUBG Korean sponsors. I don't know how much you guys follow PUBG in Korea. It's not very popular in the West, and it's not that incredibly popular in Korea in terms of viewers of the esport. They have gotten so many major sponsors over the course of the last year, like an insane amount. And I think that that's mostly just people are sold based on the PC Bang numbers, which is actually ridiculous because the viewership for esports is quite low by comparison. I think that the numbers for PC Bangs and the kind of level of interest in Overwatch are just so like not even relatable. I think if the number if it drops out of top 10, then you're like, okay, well, no one who's going to PC Bang is even playing it. That's an issue. But I mean, you could see the viewership for Brood War, for example. The viewership for Brood War, if you watch the KSL, if you watch the ASL, insanely high. Way lower in PC Bangs, 2.9 today, like at 7th place on PC Bangs. So like a third of Overwatch. Viewership's insane, second to League pretty much consistently across the board. And young people don't play it. But young people watch it, and people watch it. It's a hard fucking game to play, so, it's more fun to watch it than it is to play it. But I think that when people look at the health of an esport, they need to look at like how many people are still joining as new players, how many people are watching it. Those are like the 2 most important things for the health of an esport. Because how many people are playing it in PC Bangs around the nation is like irrelevant. Like you can't sell sponsors for an esports league unless you have viewership data to back it up, right? I mean, you can't just be like, well, the people are playing it over there, but if no one's watching it, like no one's going to believe you, except PUBG sponsors apparently.
Isn't it still a problem then that I've heard that a lot of sponsors are actually leaving contenders teams, and that now it's getting even harder? And obviously you don't have to comment on this, but in my estimation, I think there's probably only now two contenders teams in Korea who broke even, and that is probably KDP because they like command high buyouts, and that is Runaway now. So how feasible is that actually to have a contenders team at this point?
I think the problem for Korea having a contenders team is most people are still using old talent and not new talent and older talent, right? So almost every player that played on Panthera and Runaway had like some experience in professional Overwatch, right? There weren't very many like standout risky players on those rosters. I'm trying to think of a single example and nothing's really coming to mind at the moment. But if you look at players like Changshik, like the guy's been playing since the very beginning. Like it's not a surprise he would do well given his performances in season 1, 2, 3, etc. of Apex. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a shocker that he does well. It's a safe pick. It's a safe bet. The problem with doing that and then trying to win the tournament, I think contenders teams are trying to win the tournament and then they're trying to sell. But what you can do is in long term, I think if you build talent, you will win every tournament and none of your players can be bought immediately. And then you build that legacy of these players that are incredibly good. Like I can't wait until X players in Overwatch. The same exact way everyone said, I can't wait until Runaways in Overwatch League. I cannot believe they didn't get in season 1. You build this like mouth-watering, excitement from the fans and from the investors. And then suddenly when it is possible, you make so much money from selling that player. But everyone's thinking in the short term, like I got all the safe players, we're going to win this season, and then everyone will buy us. I think it's also somewhat incorrect for Overwatch League teams and investors to buy into that because like it's a system that kind of is like for both parties, they're both going down the short term mindset, and people want to win, and that's fine. But I think for Korean contenders teams, if they start picking up younger players and can sit and play consistently with them, then I think there's a lot of future growth in that. But most investors are scared that if a major sponsor like LG or something sponsored Runaway and they became LG Runaway, it just wouldn't be worth it in the long term because they would just get bought away. Or perhaps in the middle of the season, the players would be ripped away. In the contender season 1 format, you could be ripped away at any time. I sponsored your squad and then 5 of your players left and you just bought me 5 jobbers from the ladder to finish the season. Like, why did I sponsor you? So it's really tough. It's not an easy problem to solve.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.